My parents abandoned me at Grandpa's house when I was 5 years old. The day he died, they returned. Not for me, but for his house. My sister was already pointing at the upstairs bedroom. She wanted before Grandpa's body had even left the living room. Then the door to his study slowly creaked open, and every smile on their faces disappeared. Until that moment, they hadn't looked at me once. I stood beside Grandpa's old armchair, still wearing the black suit I'd borrowed for the funeral. My hands smelled faintly of cedar from carrying his favorite wooden casket handles. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. But inside the house, all I could hear was my mother's impatient voice. "Pack your things," she said, waving a hand as if I were another piece of furniture to be moved. "We'll decide later where you'll stay." Not, "We're taking you home." Not, "I'm sorry." Just another order from someone who had disappeared 15 years earlier. My father didn't even pretend to mourn. He was already studying the walls, calculating renovations with his eyes. My sister opened closets, laughing quietly as she imagined repainting them. They walked through Grandpa's home like tourists browsing a hotel they believed they'd already booked. I watched them in silence. Grandpa had taught me that silence unsettled greedy people far more than arguments ever could. So I said nothing. The air still carried the scent of old books, polished oak, and the pipe tobacco Grandpa hadn't touched since getting sick. Every room held traces of him. Every photograph on the walls reminded me who had actually raised me, who had bandage-scraped knees, attended school plays, celebrated birthdays, and waited awake whenever I came home late. Not them. To my parents, this house was an inheritance. To me, it was the only place that had ever felt like home. Mother reached for the brass key hanging beside the hallway clock. "I suppose his office will need clearing first," she muttered. Before her fingers touched it, a slow, heavy creak echoed through the hallway. The study door opened by itself. Every conversation stopped. Every smile vanished. And for the first time since they arrived, they realized Grandpa had planned for this day long before any of us did. I learned very young that being left behind changes the way people look at you. To my parents, I wasn't a son they missed. I was a responsibility they had successfully escaped. They drove away when I was 5, promising Grandpa it was only for a little while. That little while stretched into birthdays, school graduations, scraped knees, broken hearts, and 15 silent years without a single bedtime story from either of them. Grandpa never lied to protect them. He simply refused to poison my childhood with bitterness. Whenever I asked why they never came back, he'd smile sadly, place another log on the fire, and tell me that a person's choices always introduce them before their words do. I didn't understand it then. I carried that sentence with me until it became the quiet foundation of my life. Growing up, I stopped expecting phone calls that never came. Christmas cards arrived less often than utility bills. Sometimes money appeared in Grandpa's mailbox without a note, as if a bank transfer could replace a parent's embrace. They believed paying for my existence was the same as participating in it. That misunderstanding became their greatest weakness, because while they assumed I had grown into someone grateful for whatever scraps they offered, Grandpa was teaching me something entirely different. He taught me patience instead of anger, observation instead of accusation, and discipline instead of revenge. People dismissed quiet children, he would say, because they mistook silence for helplessness. By the time my parents finally returned, they still saw the frightened 5-year-old they had abandoned. They never noticed the man Grandpa had carefully prepared to meet them. No one asked where I had slept the night before Grandpa's funeral. No one asked who had stayed beside his hospital bed during those final weeks, reading aloud when his eyesight failed. They simply stepped into the house and behaved as though the years between leaving and returning had never happened. My mother drifted through the hallway with a notebook, quietly listing furniture she intended to sort out. My father paused in front of Grandpa's grandfather clock, tapping the polished wood with his knuckles before murmuring, "That should fetch a decent price." He spoke so casually that it sounded less like grief and more like inventory. My sister wandered upstairs, opening bedroom doors with the excitement of someone checking into a vacation home. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled politely, too politely. "I'll let you take the smaller room," she said, as though she were offering me a favor. I almost laughed. The room she had chosen had been mine since I was 5. When she found framed photographs of Grandpa and me on the dresser, she lifted one between 2 fingers. "We'll probably replace these," she said. "The house needs a fresher look." No one corrected her. Not because they agreed, because they assumed their decisions were already final. I stood near the staircase, watching their reflections shift across the old hallway mirror. They spoke in lowered voices whenever they thought I couldn't hear, discussing renovations, bank accounts, and property taxes with remarkable confidence. Every pause, every sideways glance, every dismissive smile revealed the same belief. They thought I was simply the forgotten child who happened to be standing in the way of their inheritance. They never noticed that I wasn't arguing. I was waiting. Exactly as Grandpa had taught me. The silence finally broke when my father reached for the brass key to Grandpa's study. "I suppose we should see what paperwork he left behind," he said, already certain that whatever was inside belonged to him. His hand barely touched the lock before the door swung inward with a slow, familiar creak. No one had opened it. At the center of the room, resting neatly on Grandpa's desk, sat a thick envelope with 4 names written across the front. Mine was first. Theirs followed beneath it. My mother stepped forward instinctively, but I picked up the envelope before she could. My hands were steady. Hers were not. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "If you're reading this together, then events unfolded exactly as I expected." The room became perfectly still. Grandpa's final words weren't filled with anger. They were calm, almost gentle. He thanked me for standing beside him when illness stole his strength. He wrote that family is measured by presence, not blood, and that true character always reveals itself when there is something to gain. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "The documents have already been signed, witnessed, and secured. The house is no longer waiting for a new owner. It already has one." No dramatic gasps. No shouting. Only the sound of pages being turned with growing desperation. My father searched every sheet for a loophole. My mother reread the same paragraph as if the ink might rearrange itself. My sister quietly lowered the bedroom key she had slipped into her pocket only minutes earlier. I looked around the room that Grandpa had protected until his final breath. That was the moment I understood revenge didn't have to be loud to be complete. Sometimes the most powerful answer is simply allowing the truth to arrive, exactly when those who ignored it can no longer escape it. Grandpa never believed revenge was something you chased. He believed it was something you prepared for long before anyone realized there would be a reckoning. 6 months before he passed away, he asked me to drive him to appointments that he insisted remain private. I never questioned him. One afternoon it was an estate attorney. Another week it was a certified public accountant. Later we met with a financial advisor who carefully organized every document Grandpa had accumulated over a lifetime. My role was simple: listen, take notes, and learn. People fight hardest over things they never earned. Grandpa told me on the drive home. The only way to defeat greed is with paperwork that leaves no room for imagination. I took those words seriously. He taught me where every deed, insurance policy, tax record, and notarized document belonged. Together we created a detailed inventory of the house, photographed valuable heirlooms, and stored digital copies in secure locations. Every signature was witnessed. Every date was verified. Every decision was reviewed twice before being finalized. By the time my parents walked back into the house, there was nothing left for them to manipulate. Every legal step had already been completed months earlier, while they were too busy living lives that never included either Grandpa or me. So I didn't argue when they claimed the house. I didn't interrupt when they divided rooms or discussed selling furniture. I simply let them keep talking. Because confidence, built on assumptions, has a habit of collapsing the moment it meets documented truth, and Grandpa had made certain the truth was organized, undeniable, and waiting patiently inside that study. I handed the letter back to my father and watched him read the final page for a third time. Each pass was slower than the last, as though patience alone might uncover a sentence Grandpa had forgotten to write. There wasn't one. My mother finally whispered, "There has to be another copy." There is, I replied calmly. Your attorney already has it. For the first time that day, they looked at me instead of through me. A gentle knock came from the front door. The estate attorney stepped inside, right on time, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He greeted me by name before offering polite condolences to the rest of the room. That single gesture quietly rearranged the balance of power. I wasn't the forgotten child standing in Grandpa's hallway anymore. I was the person the estate had been prepared around. The attorney placed the original deed and the probate documents on the dining table, explaining each page with calm precision. Every signature matched. Every witness was present. Every transfer had been completed according to the law. No one argued. They couldn't. My sister silently returned the brass bedroom key to the hallway table. My father folded the renovation sketches he had made that morning and slipped them into his pocket without a word. My mother glanced around the house one last time, but this time she wasn't imagining what she could take. She was realizing none of it had ever been hers. When they walked out the front door, the sound wasn't dramatic. Just the soft click of the latch settling into place. The house became quiet again. The kind of quiet Grandpa loved. I stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by everything he had spent a lifetime protecting, and understood that the greatest revenge had never been taking something away from them. It was making certain they could never take it from me. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no angry scenes on the front lawn. Instead, there were carefully worded emails from my parents, polite enough to sound reasonable, yet strangely empty of the apology I had waited half my life to hear. They spoke about misunderstandings. They never spoke about abandonment. Relatives who had stayed silent for years suddenly discovered my phone number. Some wanted to know whether the stories they had heard were true. Others hinted that I should forgive because family is family, listened without resentment. But I also noticed something they couldn't explain away. None of them had visited Grandpa while he was alive. The neighbors remembered who mowed his lawn when his knees gave out. They remembered who carried groceries through winter storms and sat with him on the porch every evening after work. Reputation, I learned, isn't built in a single moment. It's collected quietly over thousands of ordinary days when no one is keeping score. As for my parents, they left town carrying nothing, except the realization that blood alone had not earned them a place in Grandpa's final chapter. I stayed. Not because I had won a house, because I had kept a promise. Every morning I unlocked the front door, heard the familiar creak beneath the old floorboards, and felt something I had never known as a child: certainty. The home they once treated as a prize remained exactly what Grandpa intended it to be, a place built on loyalty rather than entitlement. That is why this story matters. People often believe justice arrives with shouting, revenge, or humiliation. Sometimes it arrives much more quietly. Sometimes it looks like keeping your integrity while those who underestimated you are left to face the consequences of their own choices. In the end, the inheritance Grandpa gave me wasn't the house. It was the proof that patience can outlast betrayal. People sometimes ask whether I ever forgave my parents. The honest answer is that forgiveness stopped being the question. For years, I believed healing depended on hearing the apology I deserved. I imagined that one day they would knock on the door, admit everything they had done, and somehow return the childhood they had abandoned. Grandpa understood long before. I did that. Some people never become the version of themselves we keep waiting for. So I stopped waiting. Instead, I restored the house one room at a time. I repaired the porch where Grandpa and I used to drink tea at sunset. I left his study almost exactly as he had kept it, except for one framed photograph of us smiling after we built the old garden fence together. It reminded me that the happiest chapters of my life had never depended on the people who walked away. I began opening the house to others. Neighbors gathered there for Sunday dinners. Local children borrowed books from Grandpa's library, just as I once had. The place my parents saw as property slowly became what it had always been meant to be, a home where people felt welcomed instead of measured by what they could offer. Every now and then, an envelope still arrives with my parents' return address. I leave it unopened for a day before deciding whether it deserves my attention. Most of the time, it doesn't. Not because I hate them, because my peace no longer depends on their words. Grandpa's greatest inheritance was never the deed with my name on it. It was the quiet confidence to know that loyalty is earned, love is shown, and dignity is protected by the choices we make every ordinary day. The day they came back for a house, they lost the only family they still had. The day Grandpa entrusted it to me, I finally found the home that no one could ever take away.